Hi everyone! Welcome back to another guided nature play teacher training video. Today I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about a very special guided nature play connection activity. And one of the reasons I say this activity is so special is not just because it is endlessly fun and magical. It was actually my favorite activity when I was a little elementary school student. So I'm really hoping that it brings the same amount of joy to you and to your classrooms that it did for me as a kid. So this activity is called Creature Homes. And one of the reasons this activity is so wonderful, as all of our guided nature play activities are, is that it is very, very, very adaptable to the needs and age and interests of your students. This activity can be great for younger elementary school students and pre-primary because it can be so open and imaginative and creative and play-based. This activity is also really wonderful for those older elementary school students. It can be engaging and a really great educational tool. So without any further ado, let's jump into the Creature Homes activity. Imagine, if you will, that you are wandering through the forest or available green space with your little students in tow, and suddenly you come across a little creature, just like this little guy here. And this little creature isn't just resting in the forest. You can see attached to this creature there is a little piece of paper. And it might be attached with a ribbon, but clearly it belongs to this little creature, so you and your students head up to investigate. Upon reaching this creature, you can see that there's something written on this card. So you might have one of your students read it aloud to the class. And this card, turns out, is a little intro card for this little tiny creature that you found in the woods. And it's not just any intro card, it has something on it that's very important. It's a message asking for help. This little card has specifications for this little creature about what it likes to eat and where it likes to sleep at night and maybe how it needs its water to be collected. It has its habitat information written out for you. This little creature card might also have something a little silly for your students, like maybe this squirrel's favorite color is red, or maybe it really likes to have a view of the moon when it sleeps at night. As you're finishing up reading the intro card for this little critter here, suddenly the interest in your group shifts as a young student yells out that there's another creature in the distance, not too far away. And there's another, and it has a little card as well, and another, and another. It appears that every creature in the area needs help in finding their own special home. And your students might just be up for the challenge of being the ones to help them. This activity isn't meant to be a real-life animal simulator. Those shelters might look a little different than what an actual squirrel might prefer. Now, this little guy could be in a home on a mossy stump, or maybe there's some nearby logs that the students find and they want to use some little pine brush to create a lean-to shelter for him. Yes, he has some habitat requirements like the food, water, and a safe place to sleep, but after that, it is really up to your students how they're going to meet this little guy's habitat needs. So once you, the teacher, have proposed this challenge and your students have hopefully accepted, you can then break them off into small pairs to work collaboratively together. You can do 2, 3, even 4 students. I would be careful about doing more than 4 though, because 5 in a group is a lot of voices when it comes to finding little homes like this. You want to make sure that everyone can participate in this activity. You don't want a child to be unintentionally left out of a group and not feeling that they have a way to contribute. As with all of our guided nature play activities, before you send them off, it's very important that you establish some clear boundaries. You want them to be able to roam and explore and reach some points of your area that maybe was off the path, and you want to make sure that they know exactly where to come back to. So of course we have our video about some nature leader tips that can help you out here, but the short and sweet of it is make sure that you set some very clear visual boundaries using nature. So you set a big tree that we're not going to go past, and then using your mind draw a big circle to that big rock over there. Everyone see that rock at the confirmation? And continue that on, drawing a really big or moderate boundary circle depending on your needs and age group. And then send them off to create their special little creature homes. As the teacher, wander around and help your students by getting involved. You can help them find those little locations, or maybe answer some questions. Maybe you can ask some questions about what their little critters need and how that looks different from another creature. Help any students who might be struggling. You can give that positive encouragement to every student that you're visiting. And of course, you can be monitoring for problems within the group. You want to be keeping those groups working together collaboratively. You don't want any conflicts to break out, of course. They might get really passionate about their little critters, so you want to make sure everything's running smoothly. Another important thing that you've probably already considered at this point in the video is monitoring for the size of these habitats. You want to make sure they're not getting too ambitious and large. You are helping your students to think about the needs of this little tiny creature and what might be best suited for their needs and habitat. You want to make sure that they're being respectful of the environment, because that is this little creature's home, and that's how you can kind of phrase it. You are not just manipulating the environment to work as a habitat for this creature, but you are in a space where there are thousands and thousands of creatures already living. So we want to make sure that while we're creating these new habitats, we're also being respectful of those habitats that already exist all around us today. Once everyone is wrapped up and done with their little creature habitats, it's time for the creature habitat tour. You are going to take your students around and visit every one of the homes that you built. And when you get to a home of the group of children, have them be the ones to talk about it. Talk about their creature, maybe the creature's name they decided to give it, why they chose the shelter that they did, maybe talk about the food that their creature likes to eat or how they met that quirky little need, but also ask them some questions. If there was anything that they found challenging about their creature specifically, maybe they struggled with some of the food this creature eats because maybe it wasn't readily available on some of the cards. Ask them about how they had to adapt to make the shelter work. Maybe they weren't able to meet a specific need because maybe that creature wasn't from this environment. So that is the premise of this activity. That's how it's going to unfold for your students. Of course, intro it however you like, make it your own. That's just how I like to do it, but that's how the activity works. I do want to be really clear just before moving on that if you don't have these stuffies available to you or little creature toys, all that you need to have are little cards like this. These are just recipe cards. I think that they're a very good size. Laminate them, of course, because that's going to make them last forever. But this is all you really need. And this card can be found in the forest when you're already out playing. Or this card can be placed on the students' desks after they come back in for recess. And this is their invitation to enter the forested area with you. They're on a mission rather than stumbling upon these creatures in need. And maybe the adaptation is that they're not animal creatures at all. One really fun way that I've led this activity is that there was a extraterrestrial spaceship crash. It crash landed to Earth, and this spaceship was filled with all sorts of passengers of creatures from other planets. And each of these creatures from all of these diverse planets had very unique needs. They had their own food needs. They had their own water needs, their own shelter needs, their own little quirks. How are your students going to adapt to this challenge? And what are they going to struggle with? And how are they going to find success in helping their new little alien creature friends find a home here on planet Earth while they await their spaceship being repaired? You can really make this activity interesting for your students' age group and interest levels and what you're trying to get them to learn from this activity. And of course, your creatures don't just have to be critters. They could be aliens. They could be mythical creatures. Maybe they're little garden gnomes. Maybe for younger students, maybe Christmas time's around the corner and it's Christmas elves who need the help. Maybe it's woodland creatures that are mystical and magical, like little elves or fairies. Older students might just want to build the shelters. Older students might want to have a bit more of the educational concept about habitats. It's really going to be up to you, the teacher, of how you want to structure this for your students and how you feel your students are going to get the most out of this activity. Let's talk a little bit about how the objective of this activity can change. Now, of course, the critters that I had here today, these are actually dog toys. Thank you to my lovely Labrador Retriever, Sally, for helping me out here. But these are a bunny and a squirrel. These are very familiar creatures to your class because they are little critters of Nova Scotia. And what better place for little critters of Nova Scotia to have a habitat built for them than in a forest or green space in Nova Scotia? This is going to be pretty easy if you are staying true to what this little critter needs. But what if you didn't have little Nova Scotia critters? What if instead you had an emperor penguin? And in the same group of animals that your students find, there's also a lion or an elephant from the plains of Africa. Or what if there's a dolphin who needs an ocean to live? How are your students going to adapt what they have available to them to meet those creatures' needs? Can they meet those creatures' needs? What do they have to really think critically about in order to make it work? And can they make it work at all? Activities like this, you can begin to talk about the larger picture. So you might have a creature who's a beetle, and you might have a creature who's a bear, and they have entirely different needs even when they're living side by side in the exact same forest. You might have animals like the penguins and the lions who have entirely different needs because they're from entirely different ecosystems. And this brings up the conversation of what happens to creatures when we can't meet their needs, when they can't meet their needs. When there is no ice for that emperor penguin to hunt on, what are they going to do? Can that emperor penguin adapt? What if there isn't water available to that lion? What is going to happen to it? Will it adapt, or can it survive at all? Using words like endangered or species at risk, having them start to think about what those words mean. It's really important that students hear those words early on and start to grasp what they mean and what the impact is about having a species at risk turn into an endangered species. What happens if that species goes extinct? You have a beetle, and you have a bird, and you have a bobcat. The beetle gets eaten by the bird gets eaten by the bobcat. And that's how the bobcat survives. That's the food chain. But what happens if that beetle doesn't have its habitat needs met? What if it doesn't have the shelter or the water or the food? And suddenly it's a species at risk, and then it's an endangered species, and then it goes extinct entirely. What's left for the bird? The bird then loses its food source, and that bird no longer has its habitat needs met. And then suddenly, what happens to the bobcat when that bird goes away? Well, the food chain slowly breaks down. This allows them to start to grasp the concepts of the web of life. And yes, they might be really focused on the animals because they just did this connection activity where they feel very protective over their little creature and its little habitat. But what about things like ecosystems? Can nature become at risk? Can very specific habitats start to be at risk? Can habitats be endangered? And this begins to open up that conversation about big words like conservation and protection and personal responsibility, to see themselves not just in the forest playing, but it allows them to connect to the creatures that are in it, connect to the habitats of those creatures that are in it. It allows them to see themselves as a part of that web of life, and it allows them to see themselves as protectors of that web, protectors of this creature and protectors of this earth. A simple connection activity like this little creature homes one can have a massive impact on the mind of a child. Yes, being out in nature is so wonderful for their physical, their mental, their emotional, their social well-being, but connection activities like this grow strong futures because it creates a sense of empathy for the earth. It creates a sense of empathy for creatures and for each other. We're growing stronger children by allowing them opportunities to have these connections out in nature, to have these experiences with each other, to be able to work hard to help create a better world for just even this little bunny here. It extends so far beyond this little classroom lesson. Sometimes it's hard for us to see how these activities can actually impact the bigger picture of these children's lives. I say this is my favorite activity when I was a child, but it was my favorite activity as an adult too. I love leading this activity because I know that my sense of empathy grew the day I did this activity. I had a little penguin on my little card for my little penguin friend who I started to care very deeply about. This little penguin needed ice. and it couldn't hunt for the fish that it needed without the ice. And it was the middle of summer when I was doing this activity as a little camper, but it was really impactful for me to know that this little penguin couldn't have its needs met, and there really wasn't much I could do in that moment. And it started a really good conversation about what about the penguins who are out there right now who aren't a little stuffed animal? What happens to them if the ice goes away, and what can I do about it? And it was challenging, and luckily I had a wonderful leader at the time who was able to kind of walk us all through that and have it be a really positive conversation. But it led me here today, and I am out in the woods talking to you as a teacher, pleading with you, hoping to give you some inspiration to take your students out into nature, because I love nature and I love creatures. And I love those little kids just as much as you do. And I love you. I love teachers. I love what you do to impact the world around you in ways that could be so far beyond the scope of your classroom. Here's what I want you, the teacher, to keep in mind. Those little learners that you have right now are going to grow up to become students. And those students are going to grow up too. They're going to grow up into voters and a voice and grown-ups that are going to be the future of this earth. Right now, their little voices are far, far too quiet to be heard, but it's a privilege for us as educators to be able to give them the words to use as their voices get bigger and louder and stronger and as they grow up. And it really all does start with you, and it starts with your students. It starts with providing opportunities for these connections to be made, and it starts with you allowing your students to work together to create a better future. Now, as I said before, their voices are so tiny right now, but that doesn't mean they don't have a voice at all. This is a perfect opportunity for you as a teacher to get them excited about using that voice. Have a conversation with your students after this activity. What can they do as individuals that might help out that little creature friend? And what could you do as a class working together to create a really positive impact? It might be small, but it's still a step in the right direction. Maybe you do a little forest cleanup or do a recycling program. Maybe you pledge to write on both sides of the paper. Maybe you have a plastic-free lunch day. You can practice turning the lights off every time you leave the classroom. There are all sorts of tiny little steps that you can do as a class, or one little promise that you can make to each other that you work towards a tangible goal to create a better tomorrow. And on that note, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to teachers and educators for all that you do for the lives of those young children and for the future of our planet. And I hope that little activities like this can give you the inspiration and that little bit of stepping stone to get those students out into the natural world, forming those connections. And I will see you next time. Happy discovering. Bye.